Welcome to Maker's Masterclass, good people. Maker's Masterclasses are designed to help you strengthen your skills in key areas of leadership. And over the next hour, we will embark on a journey that equips you with practical knowledge, actionable strategies, and a fresh perspective on how to set and achieve your goals. And we believe you will leave with a renewed sense of self and invaluable guidance to conquer any situations that may come your way. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining this Makers Masterclass on how to show up and make a difference in your community. My name is Shaniqua McClendon, and I am the Vice President of Political Strategy at Crooked Media and run our voter mobilization program, Vote Save America. I want to start today with a story about the very first time I learned what it means to have someone show up for you. I was just 6 years old. I was in the first grade, and I raised my hand and asked my teacher, "Can I go to the bathroom?" She looked at me and said, "I don't know. Can you?" At 6 years old, I didn't understand the difference between can I go to the bathroom or may I? So instead of arguing, I put my hand down and sat quietly, and I eventually wet myself in my seat. I'll never forget the girl next to me reaching over, holding my hand and whispering, "I'm sorry." That tiny act of compassion got me through the rest of class. When I got home, I told my mother what happened, and she was pretty furious, not at me, but at what the teacher had done. The next morning, she went up to the school, had a few words with the teacher, and after that day, "Can I go to the bathroom?" was a perfectly acceptable way for me to ask to go to the bathroom. Now, that may sound like such a small moment, but it was the first time I learned what it feels like when someone refuses to let you be dismissed. And it taught me something that shaped my entire life. When people in power ignore you, sometimes someone needs to speak up and demand better. And sometimes that person might be you. That lesson stayed with me, especially because of how I grew up. My parents were just teenagers when they had me and my twin sister. And by the age of 24, they had my younger sister as well. They did their best, but by the time they were 28, they divorced. My mother packed us up from New York and took us to North Carolina, where she worked two jobs, one as an executive assistant, making $22,000 a year, and the other delivering as a delivery driver for Domino's. That's the kind of childhood where you notice what you don't have. At first, I assumed it was because of decisions that my family had made. But as I got older, I started to understand how government really works. I realized my mother, it wasn't that my mother wasn't working hard. She was working harder than anyone I knew. The truth is that there are countless hardworking people like her doing everything right and still unable to get ahead, not because of personal failure, but because of choices made by political leaders about wages, healthcare, and opportunity. That realization became clearer during my time at college at UNC and graduate school at the Kennedy School of Government, where I spent a lot of time volunteering and leading conversations about how we could improve people's lives. My time at UNC was bookended by two defining events: Hurricane Katrina during my freshman year and Barack Obama's election during my senior year. Hurricane Katrina was the first time I truly understood how government decisions could devastate the lives of people, especially Black people. And then for 4 years later, Obama's election showed me the opposite. What was possible when leadership reflected the best of our values? Together, those two moments shifted the way I saw the world. After graduating, I landed an internship at the White House under President Obama, and I was there when the Affordable Care Act was passed. And despite the controversy around it, I watched the government do what I believed it could do: give people access to healthcare and families one less thing to worry about. Those experiences, my childhood, Hurricane Katrina, Obama's election, and my White House internship all pushed me toward a purpose driven career in public service and civic engagement. And today I'm lucky to serve as the Vice President of Political Strategy at Crooked Media. There, I run Vote Save America, a program that helps people across the country get the tools and resources they need to be active, engaged citizens who are also informed. And it's not, and if it's not clear, the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to come from money, power, or even feel ready to make a difference. My mother showed me that. President Obama showed me that. And those lessons were enough to set me on my way. So, as we get started, I want to invite each of you to reflect on your own life. Think about a moment of joy, pain, or frustration that shifted how you see the world and write it down. That moment you just thought of can be a seed of change. And I want you to come back to it throughout this session as we talk about what it really means to show up and make a difference. Sometimes showing up might look like confronting the dean of your school publicly with your heart pounding, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. Or it can look like whispering support to someone who is sitting next to you when no one else even notices. But every time it changes something. So for me, showing up starts with being present, but it's more than that. It's being willing to understand who or what you're showing up for and what it's going to take, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And once you've made that choice, it's about putting your best effort into seeing it through. You can show up for yourself, you can show up for your community, your family, or friends, or even a cause that impacts people you'll never meet. The point is, showing up matters, whether it's big or small. One of my clearest examples of showing up happened while I was in graduate school at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. This is a story I'll come back to throughout this conversation because it shows that making change can take many forms, even if you don't make it all the way to the finish line. When I started school in 2018, I had a moment of hope. At new admit day, I was surprised by how diverse the school seems. It wasn't what I expected from Harvard, and I thought maybe my assumptions had been wrong. Then I went to math camp, which is a pre-program for students who didn't quite score high enough on the quantitative GRE. Again, the group felt diverse. I thought, okay, maybe the Kennedy School really is serious about this. But when I looked at my actual cohort, the numbers told a really different story. Out of 240 students, only 4 Black women were in that class. 4. In a school that claimed that diversity is one of its greatest strengths. That didn't sit right with me. This wasn't just a personal value, it was something the Kennedy School loudly prided itself on. Yet here I was looking around at numbers that told a really different story. Now, I had promised myself that I would not get over involved in graduate school. After years of community building work during college and after college, I just wanted to focus on learning. But as I sat with those numbers, I couldn't ignore the small voice in my head asking, if I didn't say something, would anyone else? So I went to speak to the dean. I walked into that office. My palms were sweating, stomach in knots, and wondering if I even belonged there. But my determination pushed through, and I sat directly across from him. Still, my heart racing, and I asked the question that had been sitting heavy with me. Why is diversity so bad here? And is anything going to be done about it? It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a protest. It was one small question in a meeting. But showing up doesn't always look like a headline. Sometimes it's just finding the courage to say the thing no one else is saying. And as a Black woman from the South who grew up poor, I was smart enough to know that Harvard was going to have a profound impact on my life. And I knew that there should also have been more people like me with that same opportunity. If I had made it through the door, I couldn't stay quiet and I had to show up for others. And that's the thing. Showing up doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes it's simply asking a hard question in a room, even when your voice shakes. But showing up can also be massive and life-changing for millions of people. Take Nancy Pelosi. Her career is a powerful example of that. She made history as the first woman speaker of the US House of Representatives, and she didn't get there by accident. She got there because she showed up again and again for herself, for the people she represented, just like the women before her who showed up again and again, paving the way for her, which you'll see in a video I want to share with you. That question I asked in the dean's office, it didn't transform my school overnight, but it reminded me that even small acts of courage matter. And when they add up, they can change things. That's the same lesson we see in Nancy Pelosi's career. One act of showing up after another, stacked over time until she made history. So while this video plays, I want you to think about a time when someone showed up for you. What did that mean? How did it change you? And now imagine your own neighborhood if everyone showed up like that. Imagine your workplace, your family. That's how small ripples become big waves.
I've been to the White House many times, as an appropriator and as an intelligence committee member. And I didn't think a whole lot about when I was going for my first day, for the first meeting of leadership with the President of the United States. I had no anxiety about it at all. So when I got there and the door closed behind me in the room where the meeting would be, the President, the Vice President, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, table of 10 approximately, and the door closed behind me, I realized that this was unlike any meeting I had ever been to the White House. In fact, it was unlike any meeting any woman had ever been to the White House. The President was gracious, President Bush, President George W. Bush, and he was saying something to the effect of, "We look forward to hearing your views. I'm sure they'll be different than some of ours, ha ha ha." And as he was speaking and then got into talking about a legislative agenda, I could feel very closed in my chair, very, very closed in. I'd never felt that before. It was very different for me, very closed in my chair. And all of a sudden I was realizing that sitting on that chair with me were Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Alice Paul, Sojourner Truth, you name it. They were all on that chair. And then I could hear them say, "At last we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone.
Nancy Pelosi's story is an incredible historic act of showing up. But the truth is, none of us need to become Speaker of the House to have an impact. Every step you take to show up, whether it's speaking up in a classroom, helping a neighbor, or leading a national movement, creates ripples. And those ripples add up. So you've made the brave decision to show up. But there's a question that can make or break your impact. Who are you showing up for? Now, yes, you can show up for yourself. And that's something too many of us, especially women, don't do often enough. But when we're talking about showing up to make an impact in the world, we have to define who our community is. Because here's the truth. If you don't know who you're showing up for, you could pour a lot of time and energy and resources into the wrong place. You might miss the people who need you most, or you might achieve an outcome that doesn't actually create the change you set out to make. Let me go back to the Kennedy School story I started earlier. When I first raised the issue of diversity with the dean, he told me he was only 6 months into his tenure and was already working on it. He promised a task force report would bring transparency. And so I thought, okay, I can step back. This is being handled. But that report came nearly a year late. And when it did, it was so rushed and poor in quality that one of my classmates told the dean to his face that if a student had turned something that sloppy in, they would have failed. Around the same time, the most senior Black woman at the school, the dean of students, resigned. Why? It's my understanding that she was told she was too focused on diversity. In that moment, I realized this problem wasn't just about admissions numbers. It wasn't just students like me. Faculty and staff were also living the consequences of an institution that claimed to care about diversity, but refused to actually live it out. That forced me to stop and ask, who is my community here? Who am I really trying to serve? That was the moment I realized that if I only defined my community as students, I'd be missing the bigger picture. And worse, I'd be missing people who needed me to show up for them. Did the community include students? Absolutely, but also faculty and also staff. All of us were part of the same ecosystem, and all of us were impacted by the lack of diversity. And here's the key. Once I understood who my community was, I discovered I wasn't alone. I wasn't just one frustrated student. I was part of a larger group of people who cared deeply about the same issue. That meant more power, more voices, more knowledge about how the system worked and where to push to actually get results. That's why defining your community matters. It multiplies your impact. It ensures you don't leave anyone out. And it connects you with people who can walk alongside you when the work gets really hard. History gives us powerful examples of this. Think about the Montgomery bus boycotts. That movement worked because the organizers had a deep, almost intimate understanding of their community. They knew that people relied on the buses every single day to get to work, to buy groceries, and to take care of their families. They also knew that if they were going to ask people to give that up, they needed to create alternatives. So they built carpool systems, they organized walking groups, and they made sure no one was left behind. But what was most powerful was that people understood they weren't making the sacrifice alone. They were doing it together for each other and for the generations that would come after them. That shared sense of purpose is what allowed them to endure more than a year of hardship and pressure. If the organizers had defined their community too narrowly, just one church or just one neighborhood, the boycott may have never gotten off the ground. But because they defined their community broadly and stood shoulder to shoulder, they didn't just protest, they made history. Think about that. Everyday people facing daily harassment, risking their livelihoods, still walked miles together every day because they believed in something bigger than themselves. That's the power of a well defined community. So here's what I want you to do next. Grab your pen or open a note on your phone and write down one community you belong to. It could be your neighborhood, your workplace, your faith group, your family, or even a circle of friends. And now ask yourself, what connects all of us together? And what's one collective action we'd like to see? Once you know the answer to these questions, you know where to start. And you'll find you're not walking alone, you're walking with community. Now let's talk about something that's easy to lose sight of when we show up. The difference between feeling good and making progress. It's really easy to mistake awareness for impact. Posting on social media or signing your name on a petition or even putting a slogan in your bio can make you feel good. And sometimes that's a really good start. But real change is not about how we feel. It's about whether people and the communities we claim to care about are actually better off because of what we did. Posting a graphic online does not change a policy keeping someone from affording healthcare. Progress means the people most impacted actually feel the difference. So let's go back again to the Kennedy School. By this point, I knew who my community was, and it was bigger than just students. It was faculty and staff, and I knew the school's diversity problems weren't just a perception. They were structural, and they were actually hurting people across the institution. When the long overdue diversity report finally came out, it painted a troubling picture. A lot of the diversity the school bragged about actually came from categorizing all international students as diverse. Now, I loved my international classmates. They were brilliant and many became friends. But the truth is, without access to federal student aid, a lot of them came from families with a lot of resources and didn't face the same barriers as American students from marginalized backgrounds. And I doubt not being from the US was what people had in mind when they heard of the school boast its diversity. So my classmates and I had a choice. We could let the administration's spin make them feel good, or we could decide to push for changes that actually mattered. And then a tipping point came. Another Black woman, Dean Martinez, announced she was leaving. Here's where I had to make a decision. I could have gone back to the dean's office behind closed doors and asked him again what was going on. That would have been really easy. It would have felt safer. And honestly, it would have even made me feel good when I could go later tell my classmates that I had talked to the dean and, told him again, we need to fix this. But I knew to have real impact, we had to have this conversation out in the open because real problems can't be solved in the shadows. So in a public meeting, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I stood up, my heart was racing, and I asked this room full of senior administrators, faculty, and students why so many Black women were leaving the school. For a moment, I thought I made a mistake because the room was so silent. But then one by one, people in the room started to speak their truth. And at the end, Dean Martinez herself stood up and said she was leaving because she had never felt so disrespected and unsupported in her entire career. That moment taught me something I'll never forget. Impact comes from leaning into discomfort. It comes from centering the community, not yourself. And it comes from choosing progress over applause. But if you're still nervous at the thought that you should know having an impact doesn't always have to take you out of your comfort zone. Sometimes it looks like taking the thing you love most and turning it into service. Chef Jose Andres could have focused on being in the spotlight as a celebrity chef. With all of his accolades, attention, and amazing food, his contribution to the world could have ended with making people feel good with his food. Instead, he asked, how can I take what I love most, food, and meet people's real urgent needs. And through World Central Kitchen, he's turned his passion into a lifeline, feeding millions in disaster zones, war zones, and communities in crisis. That's not performance. That is a commitment to making change that we can all take a powerful, powerful lesson from. So, whether it's confronting an institution like Harvard or feeding people in crisis like Jose Andres, the lesson is the same. Showing up isn't about the story we tell ourselves, it's about the lives that are different because of what we did. And I want to leave you with this challenge. Think about one issue you really care about, and then ask yourself, what's the easiest action I could take that would make me feel good? And what's the hardest action I could take that would actually make life better for someone else? The difference between those two things is where impact lives. Okay, so now I want to have a conversation about something that is really hard, making change. Sometimes it will break your heart. It's not glamorous, it's not a straight line, and it will take more from you than you expect. But if you persist, it would also give you more than you imagined. At Harvard, after we finally pulled back the curtain and exposed how far the Kennedy School was from its promises on diversity, I thought we had momentum. My classmates and I jumped in, eager to turn that moment into lasting change. In our organizing class with Marshall Gantz, each of us took on a project. I chose the curriculum because I believed something simple but really urgent. If the school was training the next generation of policymakers, then they had to be honest about the ways that race and racism shape policy in this country. Otherwise, the same inequities would just keep repeating themselves. I created a pledge for the faculty to sign, asking them to commit to weaving race and racism into their teaching. For me, it felt like a common sense step, but instead of being met with enthusiasm, I got pushback. Faculty accused me of attacking their autonomy and authority in the classroom, and a group met with me and told me to stop trying to impact the entire curriculum and that I should just push for more ethnic studies courses, effectively pushing the issue to the margins, the exact opposite of what I was trying to do. One professor even said to another, "Who the hell does Shaniqua think she is?" That's when the costs started to pile up. Some classmates rallied behind me, but being cast as the face of this effort also made me a target for people's anger. I sacrificed sleep, my health, and even some coursework. And there were moments of imposter syndrome when I wondered if I was even the right person to be leading this fight. And it wasn't just organizing. At the same time, I was navigating the isolation of being a Black student amongst one of the few Black students amongst my classmates. Two of my classmates during my time at the Kennedy School used the N-word in front of me. One explaining that it was fine because it's used in music, another dismissing it because he wasn't from the United States. Experiences like that stacked on top of everything else made the fight for diversity feel not just political, but personal. By the time I graduated, I carried this heavy feeling that I had failed. And I'll admit, this is still a really emotional topic for me because those 2 years were really, really difficult. But here's what I later learned. Progress doesn't always show up on your timeline. Sometimes you plant seeds you'll never see bloom. After I left, other students kept pushing. They carried forward the conversations we had started, and eventually the school adopted a mandatory course on race and racism. Later, more reforms followed. I didn't see it while I was there, but the ground we broke mattered. That's the truth about change. It's rarely a sprint, it's a relay. You may not carry the baton all the way, but what matters is that you don't drop it. And while you're running, you're part of the race, you'll face setbacks, criticism, burnout. That's why it's essential to take care of yourself along the way and celebrate the small wins, hold on to your community, and remember that progress isn't only measured at the finish line. It's measured by the people who are better off because we decided to show up. History reminds us of this too. The suffrage movement spanned decades of setbacks, disappointments, yet women kept pushing forward. I want you all to hear from Maddie DeLone, the great-great-granddaughter Maddie DeLone's great-great-granddaughter I'm sorry, you all. I want you to hear the story of Maddie DeLone, who was a great-great-grandmother who lived that persistence firsthand. And while that plays, I want you to take a moment for yourself, write down the obstacles between you and the change you want. And then underneath it, write one small action that you can take this week. Because no matter how heavy the obstacle feels, there's always a next step you can take.
Actually, the person I would most like to interview, and it's pretty selfish and very small, is my great-great-grandmother, who was a suffragette, who was jailed multiple times for her activism, who actually became a suffragette in her early 50s when her children were grown. And I'd love to find out what she was thinking. What inspired her to chain herself to the White House fence? What inspired her to not eat for 5 days? What inspired her to, in some ways I think I might know it's the complete unfairness of it, but I would love to talk to her and find out what she was thinking and what others were thinking.
This is the heart of sticking with it. Not pretending obstacles don't exist, but showing up in spite of them. Not measuring yourself only by the outcome, but by the progress you make for yourself, for your community, and for the people who will carry the work forward after you. As we close, I want to leave you all with some reminders that I hope light a fire under you. First, define showing up in a way that is sustainable for you. Showing up doesn't need to look like anyone else's. It just needs to be something that you can keep doing. Mine was signing up for the dean's office hours. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. Next, start with your community. Real impact happens when you know who you're serving, and that could be students, faculty, or staff, or for you, neighbors or friends. Change is always stronger when you know who you're showing up for and why you're showing up. Next, focus on progress, not performance. It's easy to confuse activity with impact. To do the thing that feels good in the moment, for me, a private meeting with the dean might have been easier, but standing up publicly is what finally brought the truth out into the open. And finally, work through, not around the obstacles. Even when it felt like nothing changed while I was there, I learned that planting seeds mattered, and those seeds will eventually grow. And here's the most important part. You don't have to wait until you feel ready. You don't have to have the perfect plan. You just have to decide to do it. So I want to invite all of you with one more homework assignment to take one step right now. Think about the action you will take in the next 7 days, write it down, and then tell someone about it so they can hold you accountable. When I was 6 years old, my mother showed me what it looked like to speak up when someone tried to dismiss me. That lesson carried me through every step of my journey. And I want you to know you carry the same power. Now imagine what our communities could look like, our country, our world would look like if each of us chose to show up, not perfectly, but persistently. Change starts with showing up, and showing up starts with you. Thank you so much for joining this masterclass, and I hope you all have a great day.